After inheriting my father's assets, I've cut financial support to my family. Now they're suing me. I, 23M, have recently inherited all my father's assets, property and money, as I was the only one mentioned in his will. I am an only child and my mother passed away in a biking accident when I was young, around the age of 4. For most of my life I have been raised by my father alone with no one to help him. He was honestly the best father a man could ask for. He would work day and night to provide for me but would never show his struggles in front of my eyes. He would manage to make time for my enjoyment as well, taking me places, buying me toys and just being what you want a father to be. Although my parental family was limited to only me and my dad, we had quite a vast extended family. On my mom's side of the family I had both my grandparents alive, 2 aunts and 1 uncle. On my dad's side of the family, both my grandparents had passed but I had 1 uncle and 1 aunt as well as 2 cousins. My relatives used to constantly barrage my dad asking for money to the point where once when I was 12 he had to get a 3rd job, which was night shift, to meet their demands and mine. This always made me feel bad for my dad as he was working so hard to make ends meet for just me and him, and on top of that my relatives asking him for money was like another weight thrown on him. I never asked him why he didn't just decline their requests and tell them that he couldn't pay them their monthly allowance, but I assume it was because he felt it as an obligation of his. My mom's side of the family actually used to ask for more money than my dad's side. My dad felt that after my mom's passing, the responsibility to look after her parents was now his duty, which is why I assume he was so determined to meet their requests. I loved my dad and I understood why he wanted to help out our extended family so much, but seeing the stress they caused him made me grow a kind of resentment towards them. It was especially strong when I was a child. After years of hard work, my dad had finally gotten a good enough job that paid him well and required less work. He was able to take a break and start actually saving money instead of living from paycheck to paycheck. So when I recently got the news that my dad had passed away on the way back from work in a truck-related accident, I felt depressed. My dad was the only proper family I had and his passing meant that I was left alone for the first time in my life. I live alone by myself in a university dorm, so I didn't really have anyone except a few close friends of mine to share the news with. They tried comforting me as much as they could but it didn't really fix anything. I fell into a 2-month-long depression. Knowing that I had no one to go home to during summer breaks took a large toll on me. I attended my father's funeral where some of his friends attended and a few family members, mainly just my aunts and uncles, not my cousins. They tried doing what they could to tell me it'll all be alright and that I can come to them anytime I want, but it didn't change the fact that it was those same people that had caused my father so much difficulty in his life. The recently I had for my family didn't really fade over time as I didn't give much effort to try to make things up with them. I didn't actually tell them that the reason I was so distant and resentful was because of what they did to my father, so they just assumed it was because I was grieving. When it came time for the lawyer to read out my father's will, they informed me that he had left all his assets, properties and money to me and only me. He gave his brother and sister some old memorabilia to remember him by. Things like items and family heirlooms. I was surprised that he didn't give my relatives anything else like money or assets, but it made sense as I was his only child and my relatives didn't mean as much to him as I did. I'd be lying if I didn't say that my relatives, especially my aunt and uncle, were a bit disappointed that my father didn't leave them any money or assets, but they understood the reasoning and didn't make a big deal out of it. From my inheritance, I also received access to his bank accounts as well as the passwords to anything else he had that contained money to be withdrawn. When I started looking through the bank accounts, I noticed that his bank accounts were still set up to transfer my relatives money monthly. It was about $200 monthly being transferred to my cousins and $300 being transferred to my grandparents on my mom's side. In total it was $600 a month being transferred to my cousins, grandparents and a few other people here and there. At the time I assumed that as my father had passed and his money was now my property, that I have the right to stop the transactions and support my relatives from his accounts as it wasn't my responsibility to send them support. The real problems began here after stopping the transactions. So a month passed with no issues or complaints from my relatives. I continued with my university and everything was going well. However, it was after the month ended and the next month began that issues started. My relatives noticed that they didn't get any transfer of money in their bank accounts on the 2nd of the month and they immediately called me to ask me about it. I don't remember specifically what I said in the call, but they asked me about why they didn't receive any money and I was a bit confused and then realized that they were talking about the monthly bank transfers. I told them that I canceled them as it was now my money and I didn't have any obligation to send them anything. I remember them getting really upset and mad about this, saying stuff like your father was sending us this money as a promise and now you can't just stop sending it and stuff like we need this money and it's unfair how you're canceling it. Overall the gist is that they were really upset about this, but at that moment in time I really don't care enough about my relatives to work anything out with them, so I told them frankly that it was now my money, my assets and my choice whether I wanted to send them money and I choose not to. and I ended the call. They were spamming my phone calling me a cheat and some really bad words, but I just blocked their accounts on WhatsApp and went on with my week. The rest of that week went pretty well. I didn't see myself as a bad guy as it was my choice to send them support and I chose not to. I also very clearly remembered how they had put my dad into so much stress when he was working paycheck to paycheck, so I definitely wasn't fond of them in any way. The real surprise came when one of my cousins actually visited me in my dorm to talk to me. It was very unexpected and abrupt, but I still had him over. He wasn't immediately clear on why he was over at first, but I had my suspicions it was because of the money issue. Those suspicions were right in the end because once he had buttered me up and everything, he asked me about the money. I told him clearly that it was my money and that it is not my duty to continue my father's funding. He was arguing that because it was still my father's money that I inherited, that I was still required to let the month's $600 through. I got overly mad at him because of this and told him that he didn't even show up to my father's funeral yet he was standing there demanding his money. If that resentment for my relatives had been getting any weaker, I can guarantee that it relit in that moment at full flame. I kicked my cousin out of my dorm and told him that if he came here again I'd get a restraining order against him over harassment. He also told me that he'd be taking this to court with his sister and other relatives, and I shrugged it off. I just assumed then that any logical, sensible court in this country would obviously take my side in this type of dispute as I clearly had the better argument, but I guess I underestimated how messed up our judicial system is. After a week or two passed, I got a letter in my mail and it read that I was being sued by my cousin and that I had to show up to court on the 16th of March on which the jury will listen to the arguments from both sides. On top of that, I was thrown the hurdle of having to get a lawyer out of my own pocket, which cost a lot of money, especially for a college student. The audacity that my relatives had to take me to court over denying them something that was completely my right was absurd. There were 15 days till the court date and I had to find a lawyer that would fit into my budget and defend my case well. I tried getting in contact with my cousin as I was infuriated, but I was blocked, and when I went to their house in person they wouldn't open the door and only talk to me through their camera, where they just told me to wait until the court date. I cannot explain how stressed out this whole situation made me, and they were just doing to me what they had been doing to my dad my whole life. Regardless, I went to a law firm and got a lawyer that fit within my budget. I told her about the situation and presented all my arguments that I had. She told me not to worry as I was a clear winner in this dispute and I could in fact sue my cousins back for harassment and stress and would easily win the case, so that cooled me down a bit. In the meantime, while I was waiting for the court date, I decided to go through my dad's personal financial records to see if I could find anything that could help me in this case to prove that not only had my relatives caused me stress but had kept my dad stressed his whole life. When the 16th came, I made my way to court with my lawyer and entered the courtroom. We were being judged by a jury and not a judge, which did make me a bit more worried as I know how the jury system can sometimes not work and really depends more on who has the better argument than real evidence. Regardless, we sat down and the trial started. I saw that my grandparents from my mom's side were also on my cousin's side, which is something that I wouldn't say I didn't expect, but still a bit of surprise. The trials actually lasted much more than one day as the jury couldn't come to a final decision, so it extended out a span of a few weeks and there were 3 trials. In the first trial, my cousin put forward his argument that the support money that was sent by my father to him was a promise by him and that I didn't have the right to just take it away. They said that my father promised them the money until they could get back on their feet, which honestly at that point seemed like it would never happen. My lawyer and I put forward our argument pleading that the money being passed down by will legally made it my property, so it is ultimately my choice whether I wanted to continue payments to anyone or not. The first trial went back and forth like this for a while until the jury finally came to the decision that this case could not be concluded in one trial and told us to ready up our arguments for the second trial. I was admittedly really annoyed because a case like this almost never exceeds one trial length and it seemed like a pretty obvious and easy answer as to who was in the right and wrong. But that's the problem we have with juries over a single well-educated judge on law. Fast forward a week and the second trial came up. It was once again the same setting and arguments. In this trial, my cousins argued that as it was my father's ultimate decision to send them money, it would have to stay like that under his will even after me gaining the inheritance of that money. They were arguing that I had gained the right to access and withdraw from his bank accounts but not to change or alter any preceding payments being paid out. To me this sounded like total bogus, but by the expressions on the jury candidate faces, it didn't seem like they shared the same opinion. The trial came to a conclusion pretty quickly with my lawyer giving a counter-argument to my cousin's point and presenting basically the same stuff we put forward last time, just with more emphasis. The jury couldn't come to a conclusion again, so they set the date for another trial in a week. Once again the third trial was pretty much the same series of events with another bogus argument from my cousin and us countering it and presenting our argument. The third trial however ended but being the last as the jury decided that there would be no further trials and that we should come back the next day to hear the jury's final decision on this topic. So right now I've just gotten back from the third trial and I'm writing this just to share this and understand if I'm in the right or wrong. Thanks for reading this far and I'll keep you guys updated when I hear the final final decision tomorrow. Update 1. Hi everyone, sorry for the wait. I know I said I'd update it within a day, but I had some issues to deal with, so that's why it took longer. Also, thank you for everyone's kind words and support. I'm trying my best to get through this well. So basically the next day I went back to court to hear the final consensus from the jury about the dispute. The jury ended up taking the side of my cousin and said that I should continue paying the amount that was being paid previously to my relatives from my dad's account monthly. I tried bringing up how this was the stupidest decision ever to the jury, but my lawyer advised me not to agitate the situation further. The jury did however say that I was only required to pay the amount for the next 4 months, after which I am allowed to stop. I still think that this decision is absolutely absurd and stupid and that the jury should reconsider this, but my lawyer is advising me not to agitate it further. I discussed with her about the possibility of countersuing my cousins for stress and harassment claims, but she told me that it might not hold up in court as my cousins won the case, so it technically wouldn't be seen as the way we would need it to be seen to win. I went home that day and, for the first time since my father's death, cried myself to sleep. The money that was left over from him to me was meant to be mine, and now I'm here being forced to pay it out to a bunch of ungrateful people who couldn't care less about my dad. On the bright side of the situation, I still have the properties and some money from his bank accounts. My dad, like I said previously, wasn't rich of course, and most of his life he lived paycheck to paycheck, so he doesn't actually have that many savings in his account. So after the deduction of $2,400, which is what the total payout to my relatives would be after the 4 months, I'll be left with around $40,000 to inherit from that account. I'm gonna be honest and say that all that trouble I went through for $2,400 wasn't worth it. To me it wasn't about the money as much as it was about the sentiment. I resented these people since childhood, so to have them forcing me to send them money after my father's death really pulled a trigger in me. Update 2. Hi everyone, I just thought of leaving one final update on this whole situation so that everyone here that's been asking for an update can rest easy. It's been 5 months since my last update, so quite a lot has happened. Firstly, I continued the payments out to my relatives like I was told to by the court, and last month was actually the final payment month, so I'm officially free from any $600 outward payments. After the payments ended, my cousin emailed me about possibly continuing the payments despite not having to do so anymore. I replied to him no, especially after how he treated me with the whole suing situation, and I also tore into him a bit about how me and him are just a year apart in age, yet he is here begging me for more money and that he should be ashamed of himself. I also let him know that the time to get back on his feet is well up, and that any adult with a fully developed mind should have the ability to be independent and not rely on monthly funds from dead people. I also realized that now these few relatives I have are all the family I have left. Even though I have moved on from my dad's death and learned to make peace with it, I still feel like I should try holding my leftover family a bit closer to me. So although I'm not fully ready to reunite and make best friends with my cousins yet, I did try to resolve the issues between me and my aunt and uncles, and especially my grandparents. My uncles and aunts aren't that much involved in the court case and didn't really beg me to continue the payments like my cousins did, but they were rather like a byproduct of the case resolution with them getting paid. I called them all to my father's old house, which I inherited now, and I told them that any issues and arguments we had were now in the past and that I'm ready to move forward if they are. Thankfully they did agree, and we all forgive each other and had a good time. After that, I went to visit my father's grave and just sat there for a while. Occasionally I visit his grave to just talk to him as if he was really there to listen. It helps me de-stress and makes me feel better inside. Along with making good terms with my aunt and uncles, I visited my grandparents' house as well. I was very young when my mom died, so I didn't know her very well, but I do know that she cared and loved her parents very much, so it felt like my duty to make ends meet with them. I'm pretty sure it's the same reason why my dad would care about them so much too, because they meant a lot to my mom. My grandparents were against me in a court case, but I had a long think about it and I realized that I was in fact in the wrong when I was taking away their monthly payments. They are very old and need some funding from somewhere so they can continue to eat and pay their rent, so I understand why they were sitting against me in court. As a resolution, I apologized to them about the whole situation and the stress it could have caused them. I also offered to send them money monthly so they can pay their rent and bills and afford food. It will come out of my pocket, but it was the right thing to do. I also hope one day to get things right with my cousins, but that's probably for a future day.